Hi there, this is Ken from Emerging Creatively Tutorials, and this is ECT TV, episode 41. So today we are going to be making a pair of earrings. Each of the components on these earrings, if you have been following along with ECT TV from the beginning, we have actually made in one way or another. But we're going to kind of put them all together in a different way that I haven't before, or we haven't before. And I just mention this because I think that is a great thing to do. I think it's awesome when you're learning how to make jewelry, and even when you know how to make jewelry and you're kind of trying to get new ideas and stuff, to follow along step by step, make the jewelry exactly how the teacher's showing you. But then I think it's awesome to kind of take that to the next step, and that is use the techniques and skills that you have learned and make your own unique jewelry. So I'm going to show you these earrings today, and let's get started. Okay, so here are all the tools and materials you will need for this tutorial. You will need 20 gauge half hard round wire, and I am using, you do not have to use this, and especially if you have any difficulties with your hands, you might not want to use this gauge. I'm using 16 gauge wire. We're going to be making a spiral charm. So I just wanted to make it a little bit thicker, and I haven't used 16 gauge wire in a while, so I kind of wanted to try it, and I really like how it turned out. You could use 18 gauge, you could even use 20 gauge, but the charm isn't going to show up quite as large as with the 16 gauge. You will need some beads. I am using check beads. And I'm going to be using 4 of them. You could use 2 beads, so this will be like 2 for each earring. The size that my charm shows up, which you'll see in a moment, the 2 beads works out better kind of to make it more balanced. If you're using a smaller gauge wire for the charm part, then you could probably just use 1 bead, or if you're using a larger bead than I am, you could probably just use 1 bead. So kind of use your own taste and judgment for that. You are going to need wire cutters. And you'll see I have a couple pairs of wire cutters. Since I'm going to be cutting this thick wire, I'm using a pair of older wire cutters, not my nicer ones. I don't want to ding them up too much. You'll need chain nose pliers. You'll need round nose pliers. And you're going to need a Sharpie or something of a similar size. We're going to be making our own earring wires, so I like to wrap them around a Sharpie. And you will either need, I'm going to be using a wire rounder, or you could just be using a file. And then one more thing, and this is kind of an optional thing too, a rawhide or nylon hammer and steel block. If you're using a thicker wire, it's not quite as important, but it's nice to do. It will just help your wire keep its shape. So before we get started with this tutorial, I just wanted to bring you a sponsor message. This free video series is brought to you by my shop. I have a shop over at KimberlyKoehler.com/shop where you'll find e-courses, e-books, individual jewelry tutorials. I even have some supplies. So I would so appreciate if you would head over and see if there's something you like. I want to bring to your attention one specific ebook that I have. I'll link it below the video, which is the Spiral Wire Jewelry ebook. It has a bunch of jewelry tutorials that all have spirals. There's this really cool spiral bangle tutorial in it that I think you're going to love especially. It's at a low price. You get it immediately. It's an ebook because it's electronic, so you make your purchase, you get it in your email right away. So I appreciate all of the support you guys give me, and head on over, see if there's something else you like. I appreciate it. Okay, to start out, we're going to make a spiral charm. So I'm just going to start out by making sure my end is flush cut. And then I'm not cutting off any length on this wire. And this works if you're not using 16 gauge wire too. You can use, do the same procedure in whatever gauge wire you want. So we're going to make a spiral charm. And so I am going to make the middle of my spiral large. So I am holding this wire all the way in my round nose pliers, all the way kind of toward the handle as far as it will go. And then you want the wire to be at the top of the pliers but not poking through. And then you're just going to twist your wrist away from you. And then when you get as far as your wrist will go, you readjust. And then finish the loop. We have a loop that kind of looks like a P. Now, if you're using 16 gauge wire, it's harder to work with than just your average maybe 20 gauge wire. So, you know, be prepared to be strong. Alright, so now we're going to hold this loop in our chain nose pliers. And we're going to spiral. So basically you just kind of hold that loop in your chain nose pliers and then bend up around. I kind of moved my right wrist as well. And we're just going to continue going around. You can go around as many times as you like. I am going to do 3, and we're going to do this twice because we're making a pair of earrings, so it kind of doesn't matter, you know, how many times you want to go around or that sort of thing, just as long as you do it the same for each charm, so they look the same. So that is what my spiral looks like. Now we're going to cut this wire. And we are going to leave a tail of about 1/2 inch. And then just make sure you're making a flush cut. So that's the back kind of flat side toward what you're cutting. So make a nice flat cut. And I'm going back to my round nose pliers. And we're going to make a loop here too. So I'm going to hold the wire, it's just like how we just made a loop, in my pliers, and just make sure the wire's at the top and not poking through. Twist away, and then complete the loop. So that is our spiral charm. So we're going to repeat that and make a second one. Okay, so I have my 2 spiral charms, and we're just going to set them aside for now. So now we are going to our 20 gauge wire. And first I'm going to go ahead and make the earring wires. So to do that, we need 3 inches of wire, approximately. Again, this is another one of those things where How long the wire isn't necessarily quite as important as just making sure they're even. So I'm cutting 2 pieces for my earring wires. And then I'm just going to go ahead and trim all the ends just to make sure they're exactly the same and all have flush cuts. Okay. Alright, so now we're going to make the earring wire. So we start with a loop. This is exactly the same way we made a loop for the spiral. And I've made a mark on my round nose pliers with a Sharpie, just so I can make my loops for these exactly the same. So you just hold the wire in between your pliers like we just did, make sure it's not poking up past the top, and then just twist around to make a loop. So we have our 2 loops, and now I just use my Sharpie to make the curve for the earring wires. I just bend them both around at the same time. The part with the loop is going to be a little bit shorter than the part that's straight. And then just make sure this is all lined back up. I use my chain nose pliers and just bend back a little. Okay, so this is my wire rounder, and to use this, there's a little cup kind of in the tip there. You just put the end of your wire in, and you just kind of circle around until the wire is rounded. And my eyesight isn't quite as good as it used to be, so I like to just kind of check by my fingers to see how it's doing. If you do not have this tool, don't worry. You can just use a file. You can use a jewelry file. This isn't really a jewelry file, but it doesn't have to be a jewelry file. And just accomplish the same thing. I'm just trying to round off the edge. So it won't, hurt or stick or kind of drag along your ear when you put these earring wires in your ear. Okay. So we have our earring wires. Okay, so this is the part of the show where you get to see my work table and all its glory, all of the paint and glue and everything that has been stuck on it over the years. But I have my steel bench block, and I have my nylon hammer. You can use a rawhide hammer or like a hard plastic hammer. And this hammer will harden your wire without flattening it. So if you want to flatten your wire, then you want to use a chasing hammer, and that is up to you too. But we are just going to go ahead and hammer our earring wires and our 2 little charms. Like I think I mentioned, if you're using 16 gauge wire, it's probably not so important that you hammer it because it's pretty sturdy already. But you do want to do the earring wires. Okay, so you just hit it. And just try not to hammer your fingers. Okay, so we have these components. I'm just going to put them to the side. And now we are going to make a bead link for each earring with our beads. So I am just going to go ahead and cut a few inches of wire, and I'm just going to measure. Actually, I'm cutting about 4 inches of wire. And about 1/3 of the way down, I'm going to hold this wire in my round nose pliers. I'm holding it right on that mark I made on my pliers. It doesn't really matter where you make this mark, but just use that mark throughout your whole project so your loops are all the same. So I'm going to bend this wire around my pliers, so I've made a little loop. Now, I would like this loop to be straight above the wire. It's not. So how I do it is I hold the loop in my chain nose pliers, and then we're going to wrap around once. And as we do that, I pull this long end out. Alright, so now it's straight. And now I'm just going to switch hands, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, but you need a second pair of pliers. So I'm using bent nose pliers, or you could just use your fingers and wrap around a couple more times. And then just trim off the extra wire, and use your chain nose pliers to make sure the end is not poking up. You can run your finger over it just to make sure. And then, like I mentioned, I'm using 2 beads. So you slide your beads on. If you want to just use 1 bead, that's fine. Slide it on now. And then we're going to make a loop just like we just did on the other end. So you want to go just slightly above your top bead there. I'm going to wrap around again. And then straighten the loop as we wrap around one time. Switch hands, and oops, make sure you hold on to your loop with your chain nose pliers, and go around a couple more times here. Trim off the excess wire. And make sure that end is not poking out. So, and then repeat that for the other earring. Okay, so now we have all of our components. So we have our spiral charms, our bead links, and our earring wires. And now we're just going to simply put them together. So, on our spiral charm, you can just simply open up the loop, and it's just like opening up a jump ring. So you want to just kind of twist toward you, but don't, pull out. Kind of keep that circle, and then you can place the bead link in, and then go ahead and close it. And then same thing for the earring wire. You just sort of open it the same exact way, place the bead link in, and then close the earring wire. And you have your fun earrings. Just do the same thing again for the other earring. So those are your fun earrings. So let me know, are you going to make these earrings, and are you going to make them just as is, or are you going to make some changes? And I would love to if you would come over to KimberlyKoehler.com, and in the comments you now have the option to upload a photo. So if you make these earrings, take a picture, you can upload them there as a comment, and I'd love to see that. You can put them over on my Facebook page too, and I'll see them there too. So have fun, and I will see you in a couple weeks.